Hello everyone and welcome to this video on Frontend Developer Interview Questions by Intellipaat. In today's video, we'll be going to cover the majority of questions which you might face while appearing for a Frontend Developer interview in 2024. But before we begin, I would like to request you guys to subscribe to the Intellipaat YouTube channel and hit the bell icon to never miss any updates from us. Now let's have a look into the topics we'll be covering in this video for Frontend Developer Interview Questions. We'll begin with a general question: what is front-end development? Then we'll look into the important HTML interview questions. Moving forward, we'll cover the most common asked interview questions from CSS. After that, we'll discover JavaScript interview questions. Later on, we'll discuss React.js and AngularJS interview questions. And finally, we'll talk about Tailwind CSS and Bootstrap interview questions. I hope I have made myself clear with the agenda, so let's quickly dive into this session. In a front-end developer interview, just after you finish giving your introduction, the interviewer generally starts with a very simple and to-the-point question. What do you know about front-end development? In order to answer this question correctly, you must cover the following points as precisely as possible. And your answer may sound like this. Front-end development refers to the area of web development that focuses on what consumers view on their end. It involves turning back-end developers' code into a graphic interface and ensuring that data is given in a straightforward and easy-to-read style. Without front-end development, all that can be seen on a website or online application are some incomprehensible codes. People with no coding experience can easily understand and use online applications and web pages thanks to the front-end developers. What you see when you visit Canva or Facebook or Google Apps and other websites or other web application is the result of collaboration between front-end and back-end engineers. Front-end developers are generally responsible for ensuring that users understand and properly use the web application's graphical interface, among other stuff. Front-end developers must consider whether the web application or website is functional across multiple devices or not, keeping in mind that each machine has a unique operating system and different screen sizes. A user can have a Windows, a MacBook, or an Apple or Android phone. It is the role of the front-end developer to ensure that the applications or websites work regardless of device type or operating systems. Users may prefer distinct web browsers according to the front-end developers. And front-end developers must also carefully design a website that works on majority of web browsers like Mozilla Firefox, Google Chrome, Safari, Microsoft Edge, or Internet Explorer and Opera, etc. From here on, let's try to move topic by topic so that we cover every important aspect from a front-end developer's perspective. Let's start with HTML related questions. So here our first question is, what is HTML? This is a very easy and very simple question that can be asked in a front-end developer interview. And the answer to this question would be like this. HTML or Hypertext Markup Language is the standard language which is used to create web pages. It generally consists of various elements represented by tags which define the structure and content of a web page. These elements can include headings or paragraphs, images, links, and many more. In simple terms, HTML is the code that web browsers interpret to display texts, images, and other multimedia on websites, allowing you to view and interact with different contents online on the web page. Our next question is, what is the difference between HTML and HTML5? There could be multiple ways to answer this question, but the most precise way to answer this would be something like this. HTML and HTML5 are both markup languages which are used to create web pages, but HTML5 is an updated version with some important improvements as compared to HTML. HTML5 provides native support for audio and video without needing third-party plugins like Flash. So this means that you can easily embed audio and video elements directly into the web pages. Also, HTML5 introduces new elements like article, section, nav, and header tags, which makes it easier to define the structure of a web page. These elements provide better semantics, making it clear what each part of the page represents in a web page. HTML5 have also included a canvas element for drawing graphics and animations directly onto the web page. So it also supports scalable vector graphics, which is SVG, for creating vector-based graphics. HTML5 is also providing technologies like local storage and offline web applications, which allows websites to store data on users' devices and function even without an internet connection. Apart from that, HTML5 also enhances form elements, which makes it simpler to capture user input. Features like date pickers, email validation, and placeholders are natively supported, improving the user's experience while running the web page. HTML5 is designed to be compatible with all modern web browsers and is optimized for mobile devices, which ensures consistent experience across different platforms. So, in simple terms, HTML5 is like an upgraded and more versatile version of HTML, which offers better ways to create interactive and multimedia-rich websites. And also it is the modern standard for web development, which provides more tools and capabilities for developers to create engaging online experiences. Our next question is, what are HTML tags? The answer to this question would be, HTML tags are special codes which are used to define elements on a web page. They are enclosed in angle brackets and they usually come in pairs, which is a opening and a closing tag. The opening tag marks the beginning of an element and the closing tag marks the end. The content between these tags determine how the element appears or functions on the web page. For example, the P tag, which is used to denote a paragraph, or the H tags, which are used to denote the heading levels, are written in pairs. Everything between these tags, which is the opening P tag and the closing P tag written as /P, or the closing heading tag written as /H1 or H2, everything which is written in between these tags will be displayed as a paragraph or as a heading respectively. HTML tags provide instructions to the web browser on how to format and display the contents. It allows developers to create structured and visually appealing contents on the web page. Our next question is, explain the basic structure of an HTML document. The answer to this question would be something like this. A basic HTML document has a very simple structure. At the top, it has a doc type declaration which defines the document type and version of HTML which is being used. It basically tells the web browser that the page is written in HTML5. After that, it has a HTML element, which is the root element of the HTML document. It contains all the content on the web page. Inside this HTML element, the head element contains meta information about the document, such as the title, which appears on the browser's title bar or the tab, and links to the external resources like style sheet or scripts are written within this head tag. Also inside this HTML element only, the body element contains the actual content of the web page, like the text, images, or links and other elements. Everything you see on a website is contained within this body element only. As you can see on the example on the right side, the head element contains the title of the page. Then the body contains the heading as H1 and there's a paragraph within the P tag after the heading tag. This basic structure forms the foundation of every HTML document, allowing browsers to properly display the content to the users. Our next question is, what is the purpose of the doc type declaration? The answer to this question would be, the doc type declaration tells the web browser that which version of HTML this web page is using. In simple words, it's like a translator which tells the browser that this page is written in HTML5. This information helps the browser understand how to properly interpret and display the content of the web page. Different versions of HTML have slightly different rules, so the doc type HTML declaration ensures that the browsers which follow the correct set of rules for that specific version, ensuring that the web page is displayed correctly to the users. Our next question is, what is the difference between block level and inline elements? The answer to this question would be, Block level elements and inline elements are two different types of HTML elements, and they behave differently in terms of how they are displayed on a web page. Like, block level elements create a block on the web page, which means that they start on a new line and stretch the full width available in their parent container. They typically represent larger structures in documents, such as a paragraph or headings or lists and div elements. Div tag or paragraph tag, heading tags, list tags and table tag, all these are examples of block level elements. Inline elements, on the other hand, do not start on a new line. They only take up as much width as necessary and do not force a new line to begin. The inline elements are used within block level elements to style parts of the contents without breaking the flow of the text. The span tag, anchor tag, strong, img tag, all these comes under the inline elements. The inline elements are often used for styling, like making text bold or italic, or for adding hyperlinks within the text. The next question in our list is, what is semantic HTML? The answer to this question would be, semantic HTML refers to using HTML elements that clearly describes their meaning in the context of a web page's content. In simple terms, it means choosing the appropriate HTML tag that reflects the purpose or meaning of the contents that they are enclosed in. For example, instead of using a generic div tag to create a section of content, you might use the header or nav or article, section or footer tags which convey specific meaning about the content they contained. For example, using heading tags from H1 to H6 for headings, or using EM tags for emphasizing text and strong for strongly emphasizing the text. By using semantic HTML, you make your web content more meaningful and more understandable, not just to the humans but also to the web browsers and other technologies as well. It basically helps improve accessibility and search engine optimization and overall structure of your web page, which makes it easier for both people and machines to interpret the contents. Our next question is, explain the use of A, which is anchor tag. The answer to this question would be, the A tag in HTML is used to create hyperlinks, commonly known as anchor tags. In simple terms, it's the tag you use when you want to make something clickable on a web page. For example, you can use the A tag to create a link to another web page or another file or even another section of the same web page. When user clicks on text or an image wrapped within this A tag, they are taken to the destination specified in the href attribute of the tag. As you can see on the right side, A is the opening tag indicating the start of the hyperlink, and the href is an attribute that specifies the destination URL. So in place of those three dots within the double quotation, we can have https://www.intellipaat.com, and on clicking on to that particular link, you will be redirected to the home page of the Intellipaat website. The next question on our list is, what is an HTML form and how do you create one? The answer to this question would be, an HTML form is a section of a web page that contains various elements like text fields, checkboxes, buttons and more, which allows users to input data and submit it to a server for processing. Forms are commonly used for things like user login or search bars, registration pages and online surveys. Creating an HTML form involves using several elements, such as the form element, which is the main element that defines the form on the web page. It encloses all the input elements and buttons within the form. Then there are input elements which are used to enter data. For example, input type is equals to text is used for single line text inputs. Input type is equals to password is used for password input. Input type is equals to checkbox is used for checkboxes. Input type is equals to radio is used for radio buttons. The select element combined with the option element makes the drop down menu, and the text area element is used for multi-line text inputs. Similarly, the button element creates a button that which users can click to submit their form. When the users enter a username and clicks on the submit button, the form data is sent to the server specified in this action attribute for processing. Our next question is, what is an HTML entity? The answer to this question would be something like this. In HTML, an entity is a special code used to represent characters that have a specific meaning in web development. Entities are specially useful for characters that have a special function in HTML, like the less than and the greater than, which are used as tags, or characters that might not display properly in web browsers, like special symbols or non-English characters. Entities are written using an ampersand followed by a specific code and a semicolon. For example, %LT is used for less than, and %AMP is used for denoting ampersand symbol. In simple terms, HTML entities are like secret codes that web developers use to display characters correctly on their web pages. They ensure that special characters or symbols are shown properly in the browser without causing confusion or errors in the HTML codes. Our next question is, explain the meta tag. The answer to this question would be, the meta tag is used to provide metadata about the web page. The common attributes include charset for specifying character encodings and name and content for other metadata. This information is placed inside the head section and is used by search engines and web browsers. Meta tags can provide information like page description, keywords, and authorships, which help search engine understand and index the contents properly. Our next question is, what is the difference between div and span elements? The answer to this question is, the main difference between div and span elements in HTML lies in how they are used to group and style the contents. The div element is a block level container. It is used to group large sections of content on a web page. It creates a block that starts on a new line and takes up the full width available. The div is often used to structure a web page into different sections like headers or footers, sidebars, and so on. It's handy for applying CSS styles and organizing contents into distinct parts of this page using this div tag. The span element, on the other hand, is an inline container. It is used to group smaller portions of content within a line of text. It doesn't create a new line. It only takes up as much width as it is needing. Span is often used to apply CSS styles or JavaScript effects to a specific portion of text within a paragraph or a heading. So div is like a big box that wraps around content, creating distinct sections, while span is like a small box that wraps around a specific piece of text, which allows you to style or manipulate it without affecting the rest of the content on the line. Now our next question is, how can you add comments in HTML? The answer to this question would be, in HTML, comments start with less than exclamation mark followed by 2 hyphens and end with 2 hyphens and a greater than symbol. Anything you write between these symbols will be treated as a comment and will not be displayed on the web page. Comments are useful for documenting your code, explaining complex parts, or temporarily removing a piece of code without deleting it. Now our next question is, what is the purpose of the img tag? The answer to this question would be, the img tag in HTML is used to display images on a web page. In other words, it's like a picture frame for showing photos, illustrations, icons, or any other visual content. As on the right side, you can see that the img tag is containing a src attribute, which specifies the source of the image. It tells the browser where to find this image file. And then it is followed by the alt attribute, which provides alternative text for the image. This text is displayed if the image cannot be loaded or read by the screen readers. Then it is followed by a width and a height attribute, which basically sets the width and height of the image. Then our next question is, what is the importance of validation in HTML? The answer to this question would be, validation in HTML is like having a spell checker for your website. Just like a spell checker helps you to find and fix mistakes in your writing, HTML validation checks your web code and ensures that it follows the correct rules and structures. When your HTML code is valid, all the web browsers interpret your website the same way, ensuring a consistent experience for all the users. People with disabilities who might use specialized devices to access the web can navigate and understand your site better when it is properly structured. Also, search engines can more easily index your content, improving your site's visibility in search results. Valid HTML is more likely to work well with future web technologies, which keeps your website functional as the internet evolves. Our next question is, what is the difference between GET and POST requests? The answer to this question would be, the HTTP method GET and POST are used to request data from a server. The key distinction between the two methods is how they deal with data. GET requests are used to obtain information from a server. In this, the data is sent in the request's URL. GET requests are commonly used to retrieve static data, such as a web page or an image, while POST requests are used to communicate with the server. The data is sent in the request's body. POST requests are commonly used to submit forms such as login or contact forms. Among these two, which method needs to be used depends on the specific task that you are trying to accomplish. Now let's have a look into the important CSS questions. Here, our first question is, what is CSS and what is its primary purpose? The answer to this question is, CSS or Cascading Style Sheet is a language used for describing the look and formatting of a document written in HTML, XML or any other markup language. In simple terms, CSS is like the designer of a web page. It controls how the web content looks, defining aspects like colors, fonts, spacing, layout and more. The primary purpose of CSS is to enhance the presentation of web page by separating the structure defined in the HTML from the visual style. By applying CSS rules to HTML elements, web developers can create visually appealing and consistent designs across a website. For example, CSS can make text bold, change background colors, create responsive layouts for different screen sizes, and even add animations, making websites more attractive and user-friendly. Now our next question is, explain the difference between inline, internal and external CSS. The answer to this question would be, the inline CSS is when you apply styles directly to individual elements using the style attribute. It is useful for making quick style changes for specific elements. However, it can be hard to maintain consistency across a website, especially for larger projects. While internal CSS is when you define styles within the style element in the head section of the HTML document. This method allows for more organization and consistency, making it easier to manage styles across multiple pages of a website. And lastly, the external CSS is when you store styles in a separate .css file and link it to your HTML document. This method makes it easy to manage styles across multiple pages, and it also ensures a consistent look and feel throughout the website. Now our next question is, what is the CSS box model and how does it work? The answer to this question is, the CSS box model is a way web browsers understand and structure elements on a web page. It includes the content area, the padding, the border and the margin. Here, the content is the actual content of the box where text or images will appear. Padding is the space between the content and the border. This padding is like an internal cushion around the content. Then the border is a line that surrounds the padding and the content. It gives a visibility to the box or the boundary. And lastly, we have margin, which is like an external buffer zone. Margins add space outside the border, which creates a distance between this box and the other elements on the web page. The width and height of an element are determined by the sum of all of these properties. Now our next question is, how do you center an element horizontally and vertically in CSS? The answer to this question would be, centering an element both horizontally and vertically in CSS can be done using a combination of properties. To center an element horizontally, you can set the left and right margin to auto, which will make the element automatically take up available space equally on both the sides, centering it horizontally within its parent container. Now, centering an element vertically can be a bit trickier, especially if you don't know the exact height of the element. One common way to center vertically is by using the CSS properties display::flex along with align items :center. This will align the child items vertically at the center of the parent container. Combining both the horizontal and vertical centering you can easily center elements both horizontally and vertically on a web page. Now the next question on our list is, explain the difference between display block, display inline and display inline block. The answer to this question would be, display block makes an element a block level element, taking up the entire width of its parent and stacking vertically. Display inline makes an element an inline level element, taking up only as much width as necessary and stacking horizontally. While display inline block is a combination where elements behave like inline elements but can have block level priorities and dimensions. Our next question is, how does CSS specificity work and how is it calculated? The answer to this question would be, CSS specificity determines which styles take precedence when there is a conflict. Specificity is calculated based on the number of IDs, classes and elements in a sector. The more specific selector wins. For example, an ID selector written as #myID is more specific than a class selector which is written as .myClass. Inline styles are the most specific ones. The next question in our list is, what is the box sizing property and how does it affect the layout? The answer to this question is, the box sizing property defines how the width and height of an element are calculated. The default value is content box, which includes only the content. Setting it to border box includes padding and border in the width and height calculations, making it easier to control element dimensions. Our next question is, how can you create a responsive design in CSS? The answer to this question would be, to create a responsive design, you can use media queries to adjust styles based on screen width. Additionally, you can use relative units like percentages to make elements adapt to different screen sizes. To make the images responsive, you can make their maximum width to 100%. This will ensure that they don't overflow their parent container on smaller screens. CSS Grid and Flexbox are layout techniques that will make it easier to create responsive designs. They allow you to create complex layouts that adjust based on screen sizes. Now next question is, what are pseudo classes and pseudo elements in CSS? The answer to this question would be, pseudo classes and pseudo elements in CSS allows you to style elements in specific states or parts of an element without adding extra classes or markup to your HTML. Pseudo classes target elements based on their state or user interaction. For example, hover styles an element when the user hovers over it. Active styles an element when it's being clicked, and focus styles an element when it's selected, like when you click inside a form field. Pseudo elements, on the other hand, target specific parts of an element. Commonly used pseudo elements are before and after. They allow you to insert content before or after an element's actual content. Now next question is, explain the CSS float property and its uses. The answer to this question would be, the CSS float property is used to move an element to the left or right side of its containing element. When an element is floated, it means that it will be pushed to one side and the content that comes after it will wrap around it. Now let's talk about the uses of this float property. Floats can be used to create multi-column layouts where elements float next to each other, simulating a newspaper or magazine kind of style layout. Floats are commonly used for aligning images to the left or right with text wrapping around them. When elements are floated, it can affect the layout of surrounding elements. Therefore, the clear property is used to prevent elements from wrapping around a floated element. For example, if you have a bunch of floated elements inside a container, you might want to clear the floats after them to ensure the container expands to the correct height. In modern CSS layouts, techniques like Flexbox and CSS Grid layout have largely replaced the need for these floats. But understanding floats is still important for maintaining the older websites. Now next question is, how do you achieve cross-browser compatibility with CSS? The answer to this question is, cross-browser compatibility can be achieved by many ways. It can be achieved by using vendor prefixes for specific CSS properties like WebKit or Moz when necessary. It can be achieved by testing your website in multiple browsers and versions to identify and fix the compatibility issues. You can also use feature detection libraries like Modernizer to ensure that unsupported CSS features are gracefully handled. Now our next question is, describe the z-index property and how it affects stacking order. The answer to this question would be, The z-index property in CSS controls the stacking order of elements on a web page. When elements overlap, the z-index property determines which element appears in front of the other elements. Element with the higher z-index value appears in front of elements with lower z-indexes. Elements with the same parent are stacked according to their z-index values, with higher values appearing in front. By default, all elements have a z-index of auto, meaning they follow the order in which they appear in the HTML, and their stacking order is determined by their position in the document. Understanding the z-index property will allow you to control the visual hierarchy of elements on your web page, ensuring that specific elements are displayed above or below the others, creating the desired visual layout. Now the next question on our list is, what is the CSS position property and what are its values? The answer to this question would be, the CSS position property determines how an element is positioned on a web page. The basic values are static, relative, absolute, fixed, and sticky. The static value elements are positioned in the normal flow of the document. This is the default value for the position property. Any element with static position will appear in order they are written in the HTML one after the other. The relative value elements are positioned relative to their normal position in the document flow. When you set position to relative, you can use top, right, bottom, and left properties to move the elements from its normal position. The absolute value elements are positioned relative to their nearest position ancestor element, provided that it is not static. If there is no position ancestor, it's positioned relative to the HTML element. It is useful when you want to place an element precisely inside a specific container regardless of its normal flow position. The fixed value elements are positioned relative to the browser window, so they stay in the same place even when you scroll the page. They are commonly used for fixed navigation bars or elements that should always be visible on the screen. The sticky value elements are treated as relative positioned until they reach a specified point during scrolling, then they are treated as fixed. These are useful for navigation bars that become fixed after you scroll past them, providing a sticky effect. Now next question is, explain the concept of a CSS sprite and its benefit. The answer to this question would be, a CSS sprite is a technique in web development where multiple images are combined into a single image file. These images are then displayed on a web page using CSS background positioning. This reduces HTTP requests because instead of loading multiple images individually, a single sprite image is downloaded. This speeds up the web loading time, especially on slower internet connections. Now, because there is only one image file to download, the web page loads faster. This is crucial for improving user experiences as visitors don't have to wait as long for the site to display. With fewer images to load, less bandwidth is consumed. This is particularly advantageous for mobile users with limited data plans. The CSS sprite improves the overall website performance by optimizing the image loading. Faster websites contribute to better user satisfaction and can positively impact search engine rankings. It also provides caching benefits, like browsers can cache a single sprite image, which means subsequent visits to the website may not require downloading the sprite again. This further improves loading time for the returning visitors. By using sprites, you simplify your CSS and HTML. You only need to manage one image file and one set of CSS rules, making your code easier to maintain. Now the next question in our list is, what is the cascading in cascading style sheet? The answer to this question would be, cascading in CSS refers to the process of combining multiple style rules and determining which styles should be applied to the elements on a web page. The term cascading comes from the order of priority that these styles follow. Here's how it works. The inline styles are applied directly to an HTML element using the style attribute. These styles have the highest priority and they override the other styles. The internal style is defined in the style tag within the HTML document's head section. These styles are applied to the entire document. And the external style is defined in an external CSS file which is linked to the HTML document. These styles apply globally to the entire website. If multiple conflicting styles target the same element, the browser follows specific rules to determine which one takes the precedence. This is called specificity. Styles with higher specificity determined by the selectors like IDs, classes, and elements override styles with lower specificity. If styles have the same specificity, the order in which they appear in the document will matter. Styles defined later in the document override the styles which are defined previously. By understanding this cascading order, web developers can control how styles are applied to elements, ensuring the desired appearance of their web pages. Now our next question is, what is the difference between a class and an ID? The answer to this question would be, the primary distinction between a class and an ID is that a class can be applied to several components on a web page, while an ID can only be applied to one element. Classes are used to group together related items. For example, you could use a class to style all of your web page's headings or headlines, while IDs are used to identify a certain element on a website. For example, you could use an ID to customize your web page's main navigation bar. Now the next question in our list is, how do you create a responsive layout? The answer to this question is, to create a responsive layout, you need to use CSS media queries. You can use media queries to vary the appearance of a website based on the screen size of the device which is being used to view it. For example, if the screen size is smaller than 768 pixels, you could use a media query to modify the layout of a website from 3 columns to 1 column. Like this media query on the right will apply the CSS inside the curly braces only when the screen size is less than 768 pixels. You can use media queries to adjust any aspect of your website's layout, such as font size, element width, and element visibility. Now let's look into some important JavaScript questions. Here our first question is, what is JavaScript and how is it different from Java? The answer to this question would be, JavaScript is a versatile programming language that runs in web browsers. It allows you to make web pages interactive and dynamic. Developers use JavaScript to create features like interactive forms, animations, dynamic content updates, and much more on the websites. When you see a web page with a sliding image gallery, a pop-up message, or a form that validates your input, JavaScript is most likely behind these interactive elements. Java, on the other hand, is a powerful general-purpose programming language which is used for building various applications from mobile apps to large-scale enterprise systems. The key difference between JavaScript and Java is that JavaScript is mainly used for enhancing web interactivity and functionality within web browsers only, while Java, on the other hand, is a general-purpose programming language which is widely used for applications not limited to web development only. Moving on to the next question. Explain the difference between null and undefined in JavaScript. The answer to this question would be, null in JavaScript is a special value which indicates the absence of any value or object. Developers often use this null to intentionally represent that a variable or object doesn't have a meaningful value yet, or that it doesn't even exist. While undefined is a default value given to variables that have been declared but have not been assigned any value yet. It indicates that a variable has been declared but hasn't been given a specific value. For example, if you create a variable like var user equals to null, it means that user variable exists but it doesn't have any meaningful value at the moment. On the other hand, if you declare it like var user semicolon and haven't provided it with any value, then it will automatically have the undefined assigned to it. Now the next question is, what is the difference between let, const, and var for variable declaration in JavaScript? The answer to this question would be, var is an older way of declaring variables in JavaScript. Variables declared with var have functional scope, which means that they are accessible within the function where they are declared. The variables which are declared with var can be reassigned and updated. These variables are hoisted, which means they are moved to the top of their scope and can be used before the actual declaration. Now coming to let is a modern way of declaring variables. Variables declared with this let keyword have block scope, which means that they are accessible only within the block where they are declared. These variables can be reassigned and updated. Let variables are hoisted within their block scope, so they cannot be used before the declaration statement within the same block. Lastly, const is used to declare variables whose values should not be reassigned. Variables declared with const keyword also have block scope. These variables cannot be reassigned once they are assigned a value. Const is typically used for values that should remain constant throughout the program, like mathematical constants or configuration values. The key differences between these three is var has function scope while let and const have block scope. Var and let variables can be reassigned, but const variables cannot be reassigned after the initial assignment. Coming to our next question. What are the different data types in JavaScript? The answer to this question is there are 7 primitive data types in JavaScript. These are number, string, boolean, null, undefined, symbol, and big int. A number can have any integer or floating point value. A sequence of characters is called a string. A boolean can either be a true or false value. The null value is a special value that represents the absence of a value. The undefined value is also a special value that represents a value which has not been assigned yet. A symbol is a unique value that can be used to identify an object, and an integer that is too large to be represented by a regular JavaScript number is considered as big int. In addition to primitive data types, JavaScript also has objects, and these objects are nothing but collections of data and functionality. Moving on to our next question. What are events in JavaScript? The answer to this question is events in JavaScript are things that happen to HTML elements and are reported to JavaScript by the browser so that code can react to them. User interactions such as pressing a button or moving the mouse, or changes to the browser's state such as page loading or window resizing, can all cause events. When an event occurs, JavaScript receives a notification from the browser. This notification is referred to as an event object. The event object contains event-specific information such as the type of event, the target element, and the browser's current state. You can use the addEventListener function to listen for events. The method addEventListener accepts 2 arguments. First, the kind of event to listen for, and second, a function to be run when the event happens. Now the next question is, what is the difference between double equal and triple equal operators in JavaScript? The answer to this question would be, the double equal operator is called the equality operator, and the triple equal operator is called the strict equality operator. The double equal operator compares the values on both the sides of the operator. It performs type coercion, which means that it can convert the operands to the same type before making the comparison. For example, it would treat the number 5 and the string 5 as equals. On the other hand, the triple equal operators also compares the values on both the sides, but unlike the double equals, it does not perform type coercion. It checks both the values and their types. The values must be of the same type and have the same value to be considered equals. So here, the number 5 and the string 5 will be evaluated to be false because their types are different. Moving on to our next question. What is hoisting in JavaScript? The answer to this question is, hoisting is a JavaScript behavior in which variable and function declarations are moved to the top of their contained scope during the compilation step. This means that no matter where in the code you define a variable or a function, they are handled as if they were declared at the top of their enclosing function or the global scope. There are 2 main aspects of hoisting: variable hoisting and function hoisting. Variable hoisting occurs when you declare a variable with var. It is hoisted to the top of the function that contains it or to the global scope. However, just the declaration is hoisted, but not the initialization. The variable is created, but its value is set to undefined until it is assigned a value in the code. Function declarations are also hoisted. You can call a function before it appears in the code because the entire function declaration is hoisted to the top of its containing scope. It should be noted that hoisting only applies to declarations and not the initializations. Variables declared using let and const are also hoisted, but unlike var variables, they are not initialized to undefined. Moving on to our next question. Explain closure in JavaScript. The answer to this question is, closures are a function's ability to access and remember the variables and functions from its outer scope, even after the outer function has finished executing. They are a crucial concept in JavaScript for maintaining data privacy and creating modular code. Our next question is, What is the event loop in JavaScript? The answer to this question is, the event loop manages asynchronous tasks, ensuring that your JavaScript code can handle multiple tasks efficiently without slowing down the user interface, which makes your web applications responsive and smooth. Here is how it is done. JavaScript is a single-threaded language, which means that it can only do one thing at a time. However, it often deals with tasks that take time, like fetching data from a server or loading an image. Instead of waiting for each task to finish, JavaScript uses asynchronous operations. It sends tasks that takes time, like fetching data, to background workers, like browser APIs or Node.js runtime, and continues with other tasks without waiting. When these background tasks finishes, they put their result in a queue. This queue is called the event queue. The event loop constantly checks if the main thread is free. If it is, then the event loop picks tasks from the event queue and executes them one by one. You can understand it like this. Imagine you are clicking a button on a web page to load an image. While the image is loading, which is a time-taking task, the event loop allows the rest of the web page to remain responsive. When the image is loaded, it gets displayed without freezing the entire page. Moving on to our next question. How does prototypal inheritance work in JavaScript? The answer to this question is, JavaScript uses prototypal inheritance, where objects can inherit properties and methods from other objects through their prototype chain. Each object has a prototype, and if a property or method is not found on the object itself, JavaScript looks for it in the object's prototype chain. Here's how it works. Every object in JavaScript has a prototype. A prototype is like a parent object from which other objects can inherit properties and methods. When you create a new object, it can inherit properties and methods from other objects. This creates a relationship where the new object is the child and the object it inherits from is the parent. Our next question is, how can you handle asynchronous operations in JavaScript? The answer to this question is, handling asynchronous operations in JavaScript is like managing tasks that take time to complete without freezing the rest of your code. One common way to handle asynchronous tasks is by using callbacks. You provide a function which is basically a callback to be executed once the task is done. Promises provide a more structured way to handle asynchronous tasks. A promise represents the eventual completion or failure of an asynchronous operation and allows you to attach callbacks for success or failure. Async or await is a more recent and convenient way to handle asynchronous tasks. It allows you to write asynchronous code in a synchronous style, making it easier to read and understand. In short, handling asynchronous operations in JavaScript involves callbacks, promises, or async or wait syntaxes. These techniques allow you to perform tasks that take time, like fetching data from a server, without freezing your code, ensuring a smooth and responsive user experience. Moving on to our next question. Explain the concept of this keyword in JavaScript. The answer to this question is, in JavaScript, this is a special keyword that refers to the object it belongs to. The value of this depends on how a function is called. If this is used outside of any function, it refers to the global object, which is usually the Windows object in browsers. When this is used inside an object method, it refers to the object that owns the method. When a function is used as a constructor using the new keyword, this refers to specific instance of the object being created. In event handlers, like those used in DOM elements, this refers to the element that triggered the event. Arrow functions do not have their own this context. They inherit the this value from the surrounding code. So in short, this refers to different objects depending on how a function is called. The global object, the object that owns the method, the specific instance created by a constructor, or the element that triggered an event. Moving on to our next question. What are promises in JavaScript? The answer to this question would be, promises in JavaScript are like promises in real life. A promise in JavaScript represents a value that might not be available yet, but will be resolved in the future. It is a way of saying that I will get you the data you need, but it might take some time. Promises have three states. First, pending, which means the promise is still in progress and hasn't been fulfilled yet. Second, resolved or fulfilled, which means the promise has been successfully resolved with a value. And third is rejected, which means the promise encountered an error or failed to fulfill. You can create a promise when you want to perform an asynchronous operation, like fetching data from a server. In order to handle a promise, you can use .then function to handle the resolved value of the promise and .catch function to handle errors if the promise is rejected. In short, promises in JavaScript provide a structured way to work with asynchronous tasks. They allow you to handle values that might not be available immediately, providing a clear way to deal with both successful and error scenarios when working with asynchronous operations like data fetching, file loading, or API calls. Now moving on to our next question. Describe the callback hell problem in JavaScript and how it can be mitigated. The answer to this question is, callback hell in JavaScript occurs when you have too many nested callbacks inside one another, making your code hard to read and maintain. This situation arises when dealing with multiple asynchronous operations like fetching data, where each operation depends on the result of the previous one. The nesting of callbacks can become confusing and difficult to manage. In order to mitigate the callback hell problem, you must define separate named functions instead of using anonymous or unnamed functions as callbacks. This makes your code more organized and readable. You can also use promises. Promises provide a more structured way to handle asynchronous operations. They can be chained together, avoiding deep nesting and making the code more linear and readable. Async or await is a modern JavaScript feature that allows you to write asynchronous code in a more synchronous style. It makes asynchronous operations look similar to synchronous ones, improving the code readability. By using these techniques, you can avoid the callback hell and write more readable and maintainable codes when dealing with asynchronous operations in JavaScript. Now let's have a look into some important React.js questions. Here our first question is, what is React.js and how does it differ from other JavaScript frameworks? The answer to this question is, React is a popular JavaScript library for building user interfaces, especially web applications with dynamic and interactive content. React allows developers to create reusable user interface components. These components can automatically update and re-render when the data or state changes, making it efficient and fast. React promotes a component-based architecture, which allows developers to break down complex user interfaces into manageable, reusable parts. It efficiently updates the user interface, making it responsive to user interactions. React differs from other JavaScript frameworks because it is highly component-based, which means that the user interface is built using individual, reusable components. Other frameworks may or may not follow this approach. React uses a virtual DOM, which is a lightweight copy of the actual DOM. When data changes, React first updates the virtual DOM, then efficiently updates the actual DOM, improving the performance. React follows a unidirectional data flow, where data flows in one direction, making it easier to manage and debug. Some other frameworks might use bidirectional data binding, which can lead to complex data synchronization issues. React can be used in various environments, including web development and mobile app development. It is not tied to any specific technology stack, offering developers more flexibility in their choices. The next question in our list is, explain the concept of virtual DOM. The answer to this question is, the virtual DOM in React acts as an efficient middleman. It helps React figure out the best way to update the actual web page by first making changes in a lightweight copy. This approach saves time and resources, making React applications fast and responsive even with dynamic user interactions. Here is how it is done. When you interact with a React application, changes occurs, such as clicking a button or updating some data. React doesn't immediately update the actual DOM. Instead, it first updates the virtual DOM, which is a lightweight copy of the real DOM. React then compares the updated virtual DOM with the original virtual DOM, which is the previous state, to see what changes happened. It then identifies the specific changes in the virtual DOM and figures out the most efficient way to update the real DOM. Instead of updating every little change immediately in the real DOM, React updates only the necessary parts. This process is faster because updating the virtual DOM is quicker than directly manipulating the real DOM. React optimizes the updates, making the application more responsive and efficient. Moving on to our next question. What are the key features of React? Here's the answer to this question. React allows you to build your user interface using components. Each component is like a building block that can have its own structure, behavior, and styles. Components make it easier to manage and reuse the codes. The second key feature of React is its virtual DOM. React uses a virtual DOM to efficiently update the actual web page. Instead of directly manipulating the real DOM every time there's a change, React first updates a lightweight copy, which is the virtual DOM, and then calculates the most efficient way to update the real DOM. This makes React application faster and more responsive. The third key feature is its unidirectional data flow. React follows a one-way data flow. Data in a React application flows in a single direction, making it predictable and easier to understand. This unidirectional flow helps manage state and data efficiency. Another key feature is the JSX or JavaScript XML. React uses JSX, which is a syntax extension that allows you to write HTML-like code directly in JavaScript files. JSX makes it easier to visualize and write components, combining HTML structures with JavaScript functionality. Another key feature of React is its reusable components. You can create complex interfaces by combining smaller, reusable components in React. This modularity makes it simpler to build and maintain large applications. React can be used not only for web development but also for mobile app development through React Native. With React Native, you can write mobile apps for both iOS and Android platforms using React's component-based approach. React has a vast ecosystem and a strong community of developers. There are numerous libraries and tools like React Router and Redux built around React that enhances its capabilities. The active community also means plenty of resources, tutorials, and support for the developers. Moving on to our next question. What is JSX in React and how is it different from HTML? The answer to this question is JSX stands for JavaScript XML. It is a syntax extension for JavaScript commonly used with React. JSX allows you to write HTML-like code directly in your JavaScript files. It looks similar to HTML, but it allows you to include JavaScript expressions inside curly braces. It makes it easier to visualize and write React components. It provides a more readable and concise way to describe the structure of your user interface. It differs from HTML in many ways. JSX allows you to embed JavaScript extensions directly, enabling dynamic content and logic inside your components, while in HTML, you cannot directly write JavaScript expressions. In JSX, you can embed variables and JavaScript expressions using curly braces, making it easy to incorporate dynamic data into your elements. JSX also allows you to use React components directly within the code, making it seamless to work with custom components. Another interesting feature about JSX is it is transpiled into regular JavaScript by tools like Babel. Here, transpiling is the process of converting source code written in one language into another with a similar level of abstraction. JSX allows you to embed JavaScript expressions within the markup, making it dynamic. Moving on to our next question. Explain the component lifecycle in React. The answer to this question is React components have distinct lifecycle phases. First, mounting. When a React component is created, it goes through a stage called mounting. In this stage, the component is created and it can set up its initial state and properties. Here, constructor, render, component did mount, and other methods are involved. After mounting, components go through many stages called updating. During updates, components can change their state, receive new data, and re-render. Methods like should component update, render, and component did updates are part of this stage. Finally, when a component is no longer needed, it reaches the end stage called the unmounting. In this stage, the component is removed from the user interface. The component will unmount method is used for cleanup. Each of these lifecycle stages allow you to manage how your components behave and interact with the user interface. You can set up initial data, respond to changes, and clean up when components are no longer needed. Moving on to our next question. What is the difference between props and state in React? The answer to this question is props, which are short for properties, are how components receive data from their parent components. They are read-only and help pass data from parent to child components. For example, if a parent component has a child component for a button, it can pass the button's label or color as props. On the other hand, state is internal data that a component can maintain and manage. Unlike prop, components can change their own state. For example, if you have a counter component, its current count value can be stored in the component state. The count can change over time due to user interactions. The key difference between props and state is props are used to pass data from parent to child components and are read-only for the child components, while state is internal data that components manage and can change over time, allowing components to be dynamic and interactive. Moving on to the next question. How do you optimize performance in a React application? The answer to this question is there are many ways to optimize performance in a React application, like only re-render components when necessary. Use methods like should_component_update or react.memo to prevent unnecessary re-renders. If a component doesn't depend on the state or props change, use pure component class or react.memo function to avoid unnecessary re-renders. Keep your render method simple. Complex calculations or operations slow down the rendering process. If needed, perform heavy computations outside the render method and store the result in states or props. Inline functions in render methods can create new function instances every render, impacting the performance. Consider defining functions outside the render method and binding them in the constructor if necessary. When the rendering lists, provide a unique key prop for each item. This helps React identify which items have changed, added, or removed, making updates more efficient. Split your code into smaller chunks, especially if your application is large. Load only the code which is needed for a particular route or component, reducing the initial load time. For deployment, use the production build of React. Production builds are optimized for performance and have minimized file sizes. If you have operations like API calls or input validations that can be expensive, consider using debounce or throttle techniques to limit how often these operations are executed. Optimize images and media files to reduce their size. Use responsive image and lazy loading to load media content only when it's visible to the user. React comes with a built-in profiler tool that helps you identify performance bottlenecks in your components. Use it to identify which components are causing re-renders and optimize accordingly. Optimizing performance is about being mindful of how your components render, update, and interact. By following these simple strategies, you can significantly improve the speed and responsiveness of your React application. Moving on to our next question. What are higher order components or HOCs in React and why they are useful? The answer to this question is HOCs are functions that take a component and return a new component with additional props or behavior. They are useful for code reuse, abstracting common functionality, and separating concerns in your application. Moving on to our next question. Explain the purpose of keys in React list. The answer to this question is keys are used to give React a hint about how to identify elements in a list and track their changes. They help React efficiently update the DOM when elements are added, removed, or reordered in a list. Now our next question is, what is the context API in React and how does it work? The answer to this question is, the context API in React is a way to share data across components without having to pass props through every level of the component tree. It provides a means for components to access a context's data without explicitly passing it through intermediate components. In order to make it work, you first create a context using the react.createContext function. This creates a context object with two components, which are provider and consumer. The provider component allows you to wrap the part of your component tree that needs access to the context data. It supplies the data to all its descendants. For class components, you can use the consumer component to access the context data. It uses a function as a child, which is also known as the render prop pattern, to provide the context value. For functional components, you can use the useContext hook to access the context data directly. The provider component at a higher level of the tree passes data down to all its descendants. Any component within this subtree can access the context data without having to pass it explicitly through props. Context API is useful when you have data that many components in your application need, like themes, user authentication status, or language preferences. It simplifies the process of sharing this data across multiple components. Moving on to our next question. How does React Router work and how can you handle routing in a React application? The answer to this question is React Router is a library for routing in React applications. It uses a declarative approach to map components to specific URLs, allowing for navigation and rendering components based on the current route. With React Router, you define these routes using special components like browser route and route. React Router provides components like link or nav link that work like hyperlinks, allowing users to move between different views without the need to reload the entire page. You can also have dynamic parts in your routes using parameters. For example, you might have a route like /users/:id, where :id can be any user ID. React Router allows you to access these parameters in your components. Routers can render components directly or nest other routes. This nesting allows you to create complex page structures by combining smaller components into larger ones. Sometimes you want to show only the first matching route. React Route's switch components help with that. It renders the first route or redirect that matches the current location. In short, React Routers enables you to handle navigation and view rendering in your React applications. It provides a way to create different routes, navigate between them, pass dynamic data, and even nest routes within each other. Moving on to our next question. What is Redux and how does it manage state in React applications? The answer to this question is Redux is a state management library for JavaScript applications primarily used with React. It provides a predictable state container that helps you manage the state of your applications in a centralized and organized manner. Redux stores the entire state of your application in a single JavaScript object called the store. This centralizes the state, making it easier to manage and monitor. To change the state in Redux, you dispatch actions. Actions are plain JavaScript objects describing what happened in the application. For example, an action could be type:increment to indicate that the state needs to be increased. It also has something called reducers, which specify how the application's state changes in response to the actions. Reducers are pure functions that take the current state and an action and then return a new state. They define the logic for handling different types of actions. The store is created by passing a reducer function. It holds the application state, allows you to dispatch actions, and when you dispatch an action, the store calls the reducer to calculate the new state. In a React application, components can connect to the Redux store using the connect function or React hooks like useSelector and useDispatch. Connected components can read data from the store and dispatch actions to update the state. In short, Redux is a state management library that centralizes the application state, making it predictable and manageable. It uses actions, reducers, and a store to handle state changes and allows React components to connect and interact with the state in a structured manner. Now our next question is, what is the purpose of React hooks and how do you use them? The answer to this question is, React hooks are functions that allow you to hook into React states and lifecycle features from function components. Before hooks, these features were only available in class components. This feature was introduced in React version 16.8 to simplify state management and side effects in functional components. React hooks serve many purposes. First, state management. Hooks like useState allow functional component to manage local state without converting them into class components. This simplifies state handling and makes components more concise. Second, side effects. Hooks like useEffect handle side effects in components such as data fetching, subscriptions, or manually changing the DOM. This ensures side effects are managed consistently in functional components. Third, context access. Hooks like useContext allow functional components to access React content without wrapping them with context consumers, making it easier to consume context values. And fourth, custom hooks. Hooks can be used to create custom hooks, which are reusable functions that encapsulate logic. Custom hook promotes code reuse and abstraction of complex logic into manageable pieces. In order to use these hooks, you first have to import the hooks you need from the React library. Then you have to use useState, which will allow you to add state to functional components. It returns an array with the current state value and a function to update it. UseEffect runs side effect in your components. It takes a function and optionally a dependency array. The function contains your side effect logic. UseContext allows you to access the context value from a functional component without wrapping it with context consumers. You can create custom hooks by encapsulating reusable logic in a function. Custom hooks should start with use keyword to follow the hook naming convention. Moving on to our next question. Explain the concept of conditional rendering in React. The answer to this question is, conditional rendering in React means showing different content or component based on certain conditions. It's like displaying different messages or pictures on your phone screen depending on whether it's daytime or nighttime. In simple words, in React you can use the if statement or ternary operator to check conditions. For example, you can check if a user is logged in or if a variable has a specific value. Based on these conditions, you can decide which components or content to display in your application. For instance, you might show a logout button only when a user is logged in. You can also use if statement inside your JSX to conditionally render parts of your UI. Conditional rendering can also depend on the state of your components. When the state changes, React automatically re-renders your components based on the updated state, allowing you to show or hide content dynamically. In short, conditional rendering in React is about making decisions within your components. You determine what content or components to display based on specific conditions or the state of your application, ensuring a dynamic and interactive user experience. Moving on to our next question. What are controlled and uncontrolled components in React forms? The answer to this question is, controlled components are React input elements whose values are controlled by the state of the component. In controlled components, the input fields are bound to a piece of state in the component. When the input value changes, it updates the state, and when the state changes, it updates the input value. For example, if you have an input field for a username, you store the username value in the component state. Whenever the user types, the state updates and the input value reflects this state. While uncontrolled components are React input elements whose values are not directly controlled by React state. In uncontrolled components, the input fields store their own state internally, not in React state. You can still access their values using references after rendering. For example, if you have a form and you just want to access the form data when the form is submitted without managing individual input states in React, you can use uncontrolled components. Moving on to our next question. What are promises in React.js? The answer to this question is, a promise in React.js is a way to handle something that will happen in the future, especially when dealing with asynchronous operations like data fetching. A promise is like a placeholder for a value that might not be available yet, such as the data fetched from an API. You make a request for data, a promise is created and you can continue with other tasks in your code. When the data is successfully fetched, the promise is resolved and you can handle the data now. If there's an error, the promise is rejected and you can handle this error again. In short, a promise in React is a way to handle asynchronous tasks without blocking the rest of your code. It represents a future value or event and provides a structured way to handle both successful outcomes as well as errors, making a synchronous program more manageable and predictable. Moving on to our next question. What is prop in React? What is prop function? And what is prop drilling? The answer to this question is, in React, a prop is a read-only property that can be sent from a parent component to its children. These props are used to transfer information between components. Props can be used to send data to a child component of any kind, including strings, numbers, objects, and arrays. A prop function is a function that is provided to a child component as a prop. Prop functions are used to provide parent components control over their child component's behavior. Prop functions can be used to create many different functionalities, including callbacks, event handlers, and form validation. Now, prop drilling refers to the process of sending data from a parent component to its child components, then to the child components of this child component, and so on. This can result in complicated and difficult to maintain code. You can prevent prop drilling by leveraging context, component composition, and state management tools like Redux. Moving on to our next question. What is the difference between functional component and class-based components? The answer to this question is, in React, a functional component is a function that returns a JSX element. Because functional components are pure functions, they always return the same output for the same input. Class components are often more complex and difficult to write than functional components. They are more efficient since there is no overhead associated with establishing and managing a class instance, while a class component is a class that extends the React.component class. Class components can have state and lifecycle methods. Class components are more complex to write than functional components, but they are more powerful. They can be used to create sophisticated features like forms, models, and carousels. Now let's have a look into the important AngularJS questions. Here our first question is, what is AngularJS and how does it differ from the traditional Angular? The answer to this question is, AngularJS is a JavaScript-based open source front-end framework developed by Google for building dynamic web applications. It's often referred to as Angular 1. Angular, on the other hand, is a complete rewrite of AngularJS known as Angular 2 and later versions. The primary difference is that Angular uses TypeScript, has a component-based architecture, and is more performance-oriented. Moving on to our next question. Explain the concept of two-way data binding in AngularJS. The answer to this question is, two-way data binding in AngularJS means that changes in the model JavaScript variables automatically update the view, which is the HTML, and vice versa. It's achieved using directives like ngModel. For example, when you change an input field, the corresponding model value is updated, and when the model changes, the input field's value is updated as well. Moving on to the next question. What is dependency injection in AngularJS? The answer to this question is, the dependency injection in AngularJS is a design pattern and technique that allows components to declare their dependencies and have those dependencies provided to them by an external source, typically the AngularJS framework itself. In simple words, it's a way for components to get the objects or services they need without creating those objects themselves. AngularJS has a built-in dependency injection system. When you declare components like controllers, services, or directives, AngularJS automatically injects the required dependencies based on their names. Moving on to the next question. How can you define routes in AngularJS? The answer to this question would be, in AngularJS, you can define routes using the ng-route module, which provides the route provider service to configure routes. In order to define routes in AngularJS, you first have to make sure that you include the ng-route module in your AngularJS application. You can do this by adding a script tag to include the AngularJS script file and another script tag to include the AngularRoute.js file. In your AngularJS module configuration, use the route provider service to define routes. You can configure routes by specifying the route URL, the controller to handle the route, and the template or template URL to render when the route is accessed. In the example on the right side, the routes home and about are configured. When a user navigates to these routes, AngularJS will load the respective HTML template and bind them to the specified controllers, which are home controller and about controller. Then you have to create these controllers and their corresponding view templates, which are home.html and about.html. These views will be loaded into the specified div ng view to /div tag in your main HTML file. Then you can use ng-href or ng-click directive to create links or buttons that navigate between routes. When a user clicks on these links, AngularJS will load the corresponding route and update the content in the div ng view to /div element based on the route configuration. And that's how you define a configuration route in AngularJS using route provider service. It allows you to create a single page application with different views and navigate between them without reloading the entire page. Moving on to our next question. What is a directive in AngularJS and how do you create a custom directive? The answer to this question is, in AngularJS, a directive is a custom HTML element, attribute, class, or comment that extends the functionality of the HTML. Directives allow you to create reusable components and add behavior to the DOM elements. AngularJS comes with several built-in directives like ngModel, ngRepeat, and ngClick that enhances HTML elements with special behavior. For example, ngModel is used for two-way data binding, ngRepeat is used for looping through arrays, and ngClick is used for handling click events. You can create custom directives to encapsulate complex behavior and reuse it across your application. To create a custom directive, you use the module.directive method. As you can see on the example on the right side, a custom directive named myDirective is defined. It restricts the usage to an element written as restrict e and provides a template that replaces the element with the specified content. Once the custom directive is defined, you can use it in your HTML like any other built-in directive. When AngularJS encounters the myDirective tag, it replaces it with the content defined in the custom directives template. Custom directives can have various options like restrict, which specifies how the directive can be used, template or template URL, which defines the content of the directive, and link, which provides a function to manipulate the DOM. Template URL allows you to specify an external HTML file as the template for your directive. In short, a directive in AngularJS is a way to create reusable and custom behavior for HTML elements. You can create your own directives to encapsulate complex functionality, which will make your application more modular and maintainable. Moving on to our next question. Explain the role of services in AngularJS. The answer to this question is, AngularJS services play a crucial role as they provide a way to organize and share code, data, and functionality across different parts of your application. They act as singletons, meaning that there is only one instance of each service in the AngularJS application. Services help in organizing your code. Instead of putting all your functions and data directly in controllers, you can encapsulate specific tasks or data manipulations into services. This promotes a modular and maintainable code structure. Services are highly reusable. You can create a service for tasks like data fetching, validation, logging, or authentication. Once a service is created, it can be injected into multiple controllers, directives, or other services, allowing you to reuse the functionality across different parts of your application. Services act as a central part for sharing data between different components. If multiple controllers or components need to share common data, you can store that data in a service and inject the service into the components that require it. This ensures consistent data across the application. Services facilitate the separation of concerns in your application. Business logic, data manipulation, and communication with APIs can be encapsulated within services, keeping the controllers clean and focused on managing the UI and user interactions. Services are ideal for handling asynchronous operations like making HTTP requests. You can encapsulate API calls within a service, allowing controllers to remain unaware of the underlying implementation details. Services can return promises, making it easier to work with asynchronous data. Services are easily testable as well. Since services are singletons, you can create unit tests to verify the behavior of services independently of the rest of your application. This promotes a more robust and testable code base. Moving on to our next question. What is a controller in AngularJS and how do you define one? The answer to this question is, in AngularJS, a controller is a JavaScript constructor function that is used to augment the AngularJS scope. It plays a fundamental role in connecting the data in your application with the views. Controllers are responsible for defining the behavior of your views, handling users' input, and managing the data that is displayed to the user. You define a controller using the controller function provided by the AngularJS module. You specify the controller's name and the function that represents the controller's behavior. In the example on the right, you can see that myController is the name of the controller and the function takes scope as a parameter. Scope is a special object in AngularJS that provides the glue between the controller and the view. Properties attached to scope are accessible in the associated view. Inside the controller function, you can attach data and functions to the scope object. These properties become available to the view associated with the controller. In this example, the message property is attached to the scope. This can be accessed and utilized in the associated view. In short, a controller in AngularJS is a JavaScript function that manages the data and behavior of a specific part of your application. It connects the data to the views, allowing you to create dynamic and interactive web applications. Controllers are defined using the controller function and associated with views using the ngController directive. Moving on to the next question. How does the digest cycle work in AngularJS? The answer to this question is, in AngularJS, the digest cycle is a fundamental component related to the two-way data binding mechanism. It is the process through which AngularJS detects changes in the application data and updates the DOM, which is the document object model, to reflect those changes. The digest cycle is what allows AngularJS to keep the view and the model in sync. Its process goes something like this. When an AngularJS application starts, it goes through a process called the initial digest cycle. During this cycle, AngularJS compares the initial state of the scope variable, which is the model, with the initial state of the DOM element, which is the view. Any discrepancies between the model and the view are resolved, ensuring they match. Then AngularJS uses watch to keep track of variable in the scope. Watchers are functions that AngularJS associate with expressions in the templates. These expressions are continuously monitored for changes during each digestion cycle. During the digestion cycle, AngularJS compares the current values of the watched variables, which are the scope properties, with their previous values. If a change is detected, AngularJS knows that the corresponding part of the DOM needs to be updated to reflect the new value. The digest cycle is a loop that runs multiple times until all the watchers no longer detect any changes. In each iteration of the loop, AngularJS checks all the registered watchers. If a watcher detects a change, it updates the corresponding part of the DOM and triggers subsequent watchers, possibly causing more changes. The digestion cycle can also be triggered by AngularJS itself. For example, after an asynchronous operation completes, like an HTTP request or a timer, when these operations finish, AngularJS checks the associated scope variables and updates the view if necessary. AngularJS optimizes performance by limiting the number of digest cycles. If a digest cycle does not result in any changes to the model or the view, AngularJS marks the cycle as stable. Subsequent changes in the model are then batched until the next unstable digest cycle. reducing the number of digest cycles and improving the performance. Moving on to the next question. Explain the concept of scope in AngularJS. The answer to this question is, in AngularJS, a scope is an object that refers to the application model. It acts as a context where variables, which are properties, and functions, which are methods, are stored. Scopes are used to bridge the gap between the HTML and the JavaScript in an AngularJS application. They enable the two-way data binding between the view and the controller. Scopes in AngularJS follow a hierarchical structure similar to the DOM. Each controller in AngularJS has its own scope, and these scopes form a hierarchy corresponding to the nesting of the HTML elements. Variables and functions attached to the scope object can be accessed in the associated view, which is the HTML view, using expressions like variable name or function name. AngularJS automatically binds these expressions to the corresponding properties and methods on the scope. Scopes enable two-way data binding between the view and the model. If a variable in the scope changes, it automatically updates in the view, and vice versa. This means changes in the UI are reflected back in the scope, and changes in the scope are immediately reflected in the UI. In short, scopes in AngularJS are the glue that connects the controllers and the views, enabling data binding and facilitating communication between the application logic and the user interfaces. Moving on to the next question. What are filters in AngularJS? The answer to this question is, in AngularJS, filters are a way to format or transform the data displayed in the view. They can be used to modify the appearance of data before it is rendered to the user. Filters are especially useful when you want to present data in a specific way without modifying the underlying data. Filters are used in AngularJS expressions to format data before displaying it in the view. The basic syntax for using a filter is curly brackets, expression, pipe symbol, filter, argument, then closing curly braces. Where expression is the data to be filtered, filter is the name of the filter function, and argument, which is optional, provides additional information for the filter. AngularJS provides several built-in filters for common tasks such as uppercase, lowercase, currency, date, filter, and order by. You can also create custom filters by defining your own filter function in your AngularJS application. Custom filters are useful when you have specific formatting requirements not covered by built-in filters. Filters can also be chained together, allowing you to apply multiple transformations to the data. Moving on to the next question. How do you make an HTTP request in AngularJS? The answer to this question is, in AngularJS, you can make HTTP requests using the $HTTP service, which provides a high-level interface to communicate with remote HTTP servers. In order to make an HTTP request in AngularJS, you need to follow some steps. First, you need to make sure to inject the HTTP service into your controller, service, or factory where you want to make the HTTP request. Use the HTTP services methods like get, post, put, or delete to make the HTTP request. In this example on the right side, the get method is used to make a get request to API/data. The .then function handles the successful response. There could also be a .catch function which will handle the errors. The then function is used to handle the successful responses. The response object contains the data returned from the server along with status headers and other informations. If you want to send data with a post request, you can include the data as the second parameter in the .post method. By utilizing the HTTP services methods, you can easily make HTTP requests in AngularJS applications, allowing your application to interact with remote servers and APIs. Moving on to the next question. What is the purpose of ng-repeat in AngularJS? The answer to this question is, the ng-repeat directive in AngularJS is used to iterate over a collection such as an array or an object and generate HTML content for each item in the collection. It allows you to create dynamic lists or tables in your application by repeating a set of HTML elements for each item in the collection. In the example on the right side, you can see ngRepeat equals to item in items. This creates a list item for each item in the items array. The content of each list item is bound to the name property of the corresponding item in the array. ngRepeat can also iterate over the properties of an object. You can also nest ngRepeat directives to iterate over nested collections. ngRepeat allows you to create dynamic templates, enabling you to display data without having to manually create repetitive HTML elements for each item in your collection. If the collection being iterated changes due to user interactions, API calls, or due to any other reason, the ngRepeat directive automatically updates the view to reflect the changes in the collection. Moving on to the next question. Explain the concept of directives like ngIf, ngShow, and ngHide. The answer to this question would be, directives in AngularJS like ngIf, ngShow, and ngHide are tools that help you control how elements in your web page are displayed or hidden based on certain conditions. Let's talk about these directives one by one. Starting with ngIf. ngIf conditionally adds or removes an element from the DOM, which is the web page's structure, based on a condition. If the condition is true, the element is shown, and if it is false, the element is removed from the page. Next is ngShow. It displays an element if the condition is true and hides if the condition is false. The element is still in the DOM but just not visible. Moving on to ngHide. It's like the opposite of ngShow. It hides an element if the condition is true and shows it if the condition is false. In simple words, these directives help you make parts of a web page appear or disappear depending on specific rules, making it dynamic and responsive to user interactions or data changes. Moving on to the next question. What is the AngularJS module and how it is used? The answer to this question is, in AngularJS, a module is a container for different parts of your application, such as controllers, services, directives, filters, and configuration information. It helps in organizing and managing various components of your application by providing a way to declare, configure, and assemble them together. In order to create a module, you need to use the angular.module function. It takes two arguments, the name of the module and an array of dependencies. In the example on the right side, my app is the name of your module, and the opening and closing box brackets indicates that your module has no dependency on other modules. You typically define this in a separate JavaScript file or script block at the beginning of your application. Once you have a module, you can add different components to it, such as controllers, services, and directives. To use your module in an HTML file, you need to indicate the module name using the ng-app. To use your module in an HTML file, you need to indicate the module name using the ng-app directive. You place this directive on an HTML element, typically the body or a root element of your application. In short, an AngularJS module is a container that holds different components of your application. It promotes modularity, encapsulation, and maintainability by providing a structured way to organize and manage your application's features and functionalities. Moving on to the next question. How does AngularJS handle security and what are some best practices? The answer to this question is, AngularJS doesn't provide built-in security, but it offers tools to prevent common web vulnerabilities. The best practices include sanitizing user input, using HTTPS, and implementing server-side validation and authentications. Moving on to our next question. Angular is a framework or library. Justify your answer. The answer to this question would be, Angular is an application framework. It provides a collection of tools and libraries that serve as a foundation for the development of applications. Frameworks usually include a set of conventions and best practices that can assist developers in writing more efficient and maintainable code, and Angular does exactly the same. On the other hand, libraries are merely collections of reusable code. Libraries can be used to add specific features or capabilities to a program, but they do not provide an entire framework for creating the application, like Angular and other similar frameworks do. Moving on to the next question. What is the difference between a directive and a service in AngularJS? The answer to this question would be, Directives and services are two fundamental components in AngularJS that serve different purposes. Directives are mostly used to improve the appearance and behavior of HTML components in the user interface. They enable you to extend HTML by adding new tags or properties that AngularJS can recognize and handle. Directives allow you to deal with the document object model directly. They can be used to add behavior to items, manipulate them, or construct new widgets. On the other hand, services are used to encapsulate and provide reusable businesses, logic, or functionality that can be shared between different areas of an AngularJS application. They are effectively singletons, which means that each service has just one instance in an application. Services are frequently injected as dependencies into controllers, directives, and other components. By allowing you to separate the logic for individual features or functionalities, you may promote modularity and separation of concerns in your application. Now let's look into some Tailwind CSS questions. Here our first question is, what is Tailwind CSS? The answer to this question would be, Tailwind CSS is a popular utility-first CSS framework that makes it easier to create user interfaces. It includes a set of pre-designed CSS classes that you may use to determine the style and layout of your HTML elements. Rather than writing custom CSS for each element, Tailwind CSS allows developers to rapidly create responsive and visually consistent designs. Moving on to the next question. How does Tailwind CSS differ from traditional CSS frameworks like Bootstrap? The answer to this question would be, unlike traditional CSS frameworks, Tailwind CSS doesn't come with pre-designed components. Instead, it provides utility classes that you can use to style your own custom components. This gives developers more flexibility and control over the design. Moving on to the next question. How do you install Tailwind CSS in a project? The answer to this question would be, you can install Tailwind CSS using npm or yarn. Run the command npm install Tailwind CSS in your command prompt in order to install the Tailwind CSS. Then create a configuration file and build the CSS by writing npx Tailwind CSS init-p command. Moving on to the next question. Explain the concept of utility-first approach in Tailwind CSS. The answer to this question is, the utility-first approach means that you build your design using small, single-purpose utility classes. These classes can be combined to create complex designs without writing custom CSS. It promotes a highly responsive and maintainable code base. Moving on to the next question. What is the purpose of the tailwind.config.js file? The answer to this question would be, the tailwind.config.js file in a Tailwind CSS project serves as a configuration file that allows you to customize various aspects of the Tailwind framework. It provides a way to extend, override, or remove default settings and styles. The Tailwind CSS comes with a default configuration that defines color, topography, spacing, breakpoints, and other styles. The tailwind.config.js file allows you to override default configuration values such as colors, font sizes, breakpoints, and more. You can tailor the framework to match your specific design requirements. You can define custom component styles in this tailwind.config.js file. For example, you might want to create custom styles for buttons, cards, or other UI components. Tailwind CSS allows you to add custom utility classes which are not included in the default set. This is particularly useful when you have specific design pattern unique to your project. Moving on to the next question. How can you add custom styles to Tailwind CSS? The answer to this question would be, you can use the @apply directive to apply custom CSS within your utility classes. Additionally, you can extend the default configuration in tailwind.config.js to include your own styles. You can use the theme and extend sections in this file. These sections allow you to customize existing styles or add new styles to your Tailwind CSS framework. The theme section in tailwind.config.js is used to customize the default style provided by Tailwind CSS. For example, you can customize color, spacing, topography, and other aspects of your design system. You can see on the example on the right side, the colors key in the theme section is extended to include custom color definitions. You can similarly extend other properties like font size, spacing, line height, etc. based on your project requirements. By using this theme section in your tailwind.config.js file, you can easily add custom styles to Tailwind CSS, ensuring that your design system aligns with your project's specific requirements. Moving on to the next question. What is JIT or just-in-time mode in Tailwind CSS? The answer to this question is JIT or just-in-time mode is a feature that compiles only the CSS that is actually used in your project, resulting in significantly smaller file sizes. It is especially useful for large projects with a wide range of utility classes. Moving on to the next question. How can you customize the default color palette in Tailwind CSS? The answer to this question is, in Tailwind CSS, you can customize the default color palette by extending the theme section in the tailwind.config.js file. As you can see in the example on the right side, the colors section is extended inside the themes section, where the customization is done for the color pink. You can also customize other aspects of the color palette such as hover, focus and active states by extending the theme section further. Moving on to the next question. Explain the purpose of purging CSS in Tailwind CSS. The answer to this question is, purging CSS is the process of removing unused styles from your final CSS file. This significantly reduces the file size, making it more efficient for production users. It's crucial for optimizing performance. Moving on to the next question. How can you apply hover and focus states in Tailwind CSS? The answer to this question is, Tailwind CSS provides special classes like hover and focus that allow you to apply styles on hover and focus respectively. For example, as you can see in the example on the right side, hover bg-blue-500 will change the background color when hovered on it. Moving on to the next question. How do you use responsive variants in Tailwind CSS? The answer to this question would be, in Tailwind CSS, responsive variants allow us to apply different styles to an element based on the size of screen or breakpoints. To use a responsive variant, we simply prefix the utility class with the breakpoint followed by a colon. By default, it includes 4 breakpoints: SM, MD, LG and XL. SM is used for small screens like phones, MD is used for medium screens like tablets, LG for large screens like laptops, and XL is used for extra large screens like desktops. You can also chain multiple responsive variants to apply different styles at different breakpoints. Our next question is, how do you handle third-party plugin in Tailwind CSS? The answer to this question is, Tailwind CSS has an ecosystem of third-party plugins that can be easily integrated. You can install them using npm and add them to your tailwind.config.js file to extend the framework's functionality. Now the next question in our list is, how can you handle browser compatibility in Tailwind CSS? The answer to this question is, Tailwind CSS generates CSS using PostCSS, which ensures compatibility with modern browsers. However, for older browsers, you may need to use a tool like AutoPrefixer to add necessary vendor prefixes. Moving on to the next question. What are some performance optimization techniques for Tailwind CSS? The answer to this question is, performance optimization includes using JIT mode, purging unused CSS, and minimizing the number of utility classes used. Additionally, minimizing the number of variants and keeping the configuration file lean can improve the performance. Moving on to the next question. Can you use Tailwind CSS with other CSS frameworks or libraries? The answer to this question is yes. Tailwind CSS can be used alongside other CSS frameworks or libraries. However, it's important to manage conflicts between these classes to ensure consistent styling. Now let's have a look into the important Bootstrap questions. Here our first question is, what is Bootstrap and why is it used? The answer to this question is Bootstrap is a popular front-end framework for developing responsive and mobile-first websites and web applications. It provides a collection of pre-designed HTML, CSS, and JavaScript components such as navigation bars, modals, forms, buttons, and more. Bootstrap simplifies the process of building consistent and visually appealing user interfaces by offering a set of ready-to-use elements and styles. Bootstrap is widely used in web development due to many reasons. First, its responsive design. Bootstrap is built with responsive web design in mind. It ensures that your website or web application looks and functions well on various devices and screen sizes, including desktops, tablets, and smartphones. Bootstrap's grid system and responsive utilities make it easy to create adaptive layouts. Second, consistent design and UI elements. Bootstrap provides a unified and consistent design language across different parts of your application. It offers a wide range of UI components and styles that help maintain a consistent look and feel, making your project visually cohesive. Third reason is the time efficiency. Bootstrap allows developers to save time by providing pre-designed components and styles. Instead of building UI elements from scratch, developers can leverage Bootstrap's components, resulting in faster development cycles and reduced effort in designing and styling the common elements. Fourth is customizability. While Bootstrap provides a default set of style and components, it is highly customizable. Developers can customize the framework by modifying variables, creating their own themes, and adding or removing components based on project requirements. Bootstrap also has a large and active community of developers and designers. This community support includes documentation, tutorials, forums, and third-party themes and plugins. Developers can find resources and solutions for common issues, making it easier to troubleshoot problems and implement complex features. Bootstrap also handles the cross-browser compatibility issues, ensuring that your website or application works consistently across different web browsers. It helps avoid browsers' specific quirk and inconsistencies in rendering. In summary, Bootstrap is used because it simplifies and accelerates the web development process. By offering a comprehensive set of responsive components, consistent design, and community support, Bootstrap enables developers to create modern, visually appealing, and user-friendly website and web applications with less effort and time. Moving on to the next question. What is a responsive web design and how does Bootstrap achieve it? The answer to this question is responsive web design is an approach that ensures web applications adapt to different screen sizes and devices. Bootstrap helps achieve this by providing a responsive grid system and CSS classes that automatically adjust the layout and styling based on the device's viewport size. Our next question is, how do you include Bootstrap in a project? The answer to this question is, you can include Bootstrap in a project by adding the Bootstrap CSS and JavaScript files to your HTML document. You can either download Bootstrap from the official website or use a content delivery network or CDN. Additionally, you can use package managers like npm or yarn to install and manage Bootstrap. The next question in our list is, explain the Bootstrap grid system. The answer to this question would be, Bootstrap's grid system is a 12-column layout system that allows for easy and responsive design. You can use classes like callMD6 to define the column width and placement on different screen sizes. It ensures proper alignment and flexibility in creating layouts. Now our next question is, what are Bootstrap components? The answer to this question would be, Bootstrap components are pre-designed UI elements like buttons, forms, navigation bars, and models. They can be easily integrated into your web project by adding specific Bootstrap classes, saving your time and effort in designing these elements from scratch. The next question on our list is, describe the difference between Bootstrap's container and container fluid classes. The answer to this question is, in Bootstrap, both the container and container fluid class are used to create responsive layouts, but they have key differences in terms of width and responsiveness. The container class in Bootstrap creates a fixed width container for your content. The width of the container adjusts based on the screen size, providing a responsive layout. It has maximum widths defined for different screen sizes like SM, MD, LG and XL to ensure the content doesn't become excessively wide on larger screens. The container class is ideal for designing where you want to maintain a consistent content width across various screen sizes. On the other hand, the container fluid class creates a full width container that spans the entire viewport width. It adjusts its width based on the user's screen size, ensuring that the content stretches to fill the entire available space. Unlike the container class, container fluid does not have maximum widths, allowing it to expand to fit any screen size. The container fluid class is useful when you want your content to take up the full width of the screen, creating a fluid edge-to-edge design. By understanding the difference between container and container fluid, you can choose the appropriate class based on your design requirement to achieve the desired layout for your Bootstrap-based web projects. Moving on to the next question. How can you customize Bootstrap to match a project's specific design? The answer to this question is, you can customize Bootstrap by overriding default styles with your own CSS, modifying the SASS variables or using the official Bootstrap customizer. This allows you to adapt Bootstrap to your project's unique design requirements. Moving on to the next question. What are Bootstrap themes and how they can be used? The answer to this question is, Bootstrap themes are customized styles and components built on top of Bootstrap. You can use themes to change the visual appearance of your Bootstrap-powered project, ensuring a unique and tailored design. Moving on to the next question. Explain the concept of Bootstrap models and their uses. The answer to this question is, Bootstrap models are dialog boxes that appear on top of the current page. They are commonly used for displaying content or forms without navigating to a new page. Models can be triggered using JavaScript or data attributes. The next question in our list is, how does Bootstrap handle browser compatibility issues? The answer to this question is, Bootstrap is designed to work smoothly across modern browsers. It includes CSS and JavaScript that account for browser-specific quirks and inconsistencies, ensuring a consistent user experience. Moving on to the next question. What is the purpose of Bootstrap's navigation component and how do they work? The answer to this question is, Bootstrap provides navigation component like the navbar, navtabs, and pagination to help users navigate a website. These components offer organized and responsive menus and links that adapt to different screen sizes. Moving on to the next question. Explain the concept of Bootstrap's utility classes. The answer to this question is, Bootstrap offers utility classes for quick styling adjustments. These classes are often prefixed with .u- and allow developers to make changes to text alignment, color, spacing, and other styling aspects without writing custom CSS. Moving on to the next question. How does Bootstrap handle mobile-first design? The answer to this question would be, Bootstrap follows a mobile-first approach, meaning it starts with styling for smaller screens and progressively enhances for larger screens. This ensures that your web application looks good on mobile devices by default. The next question in our list is, what are Bootstrap tooltips and popovers and how are they implemented? The answer to this question is, Bootstrap tooltips and popovers are interactive elements used to display additional information when users hover over or click on an element. They can be easily implemented by using data attributes or JavaScripts. In order to implement the tooltips, add the data-toggle tooltip attribute to the element you want to provide a tooltip for. Optionally, set the title attribute to specify the tooltip text. In order to implement popover, add the data-toggle popover attribute to the element you want to trigger the popover. Optionally, set the data content attribute to specify the popover content. Moving on to the next question. Can you explain how Bootstrap's responsive class work? The answer to this question would be Bootstrap's responsive classes like .d-none and .d-md-block allow you to control the visibility and behavior of elements on different screen sizes. You can show or hide elements based on the viewport width, improving the user experience on various devices. Moving on to the next question. What are some new features in Bootstrap 5? The answer to this question would be Bootstrap 5 is the most recent major version of the popular CSS framework, and it includes a wide range of new features and enhancements. Some of the most noticeable changes in Bootstrap 5 are: Bootstrap 5 comes with a new collection of SVG icons that are more uniform and scalable than the previous ones. The new placeholder component is added, which allows you to construct placeholder elements for text, photos, and other material. The new off-canvas component allows for more flexible creation of side-out menus and other off-screen navigation elements. With the new stack helper, you can build responsive stacks of items that can be stacked vertically on smaller screens and horizontally on bigger ones. Horizontal collapsing is now supported by the collapse component, which might be beneficial for designing accordions and other collapsible elements. The new floating label feature makes it easy to build floating labels from fields. The file input, checks, and radios from controls have been updated to be more consistent and accessible. The accordion component has been changed to make it more accessible and responsive. And Bootstrap 5 now includes built-in support for right to left, that is RTL languages. In addition to these new features, Bootstrap 5 also includes a number of bug fixes and performance improvements. That's all we have for this session. I hope these questions help you crack your next front-end developer interview. Thank you for staying till the end. If you found this video informative and helpful, don't forget to give it a like and share it with your friends and colleagues. Also consider subscribing to our Intellipaat YouTube channel to stay updated with such informative contents from our side.
Just a quick info guys, Intellipaat offers full stack web developer course in collaboration with E&ICT Academy IIT Guwahati. Through this course, you can learn everything from front-end web development to back-end web development from esteemed IIT Guwahati faculties and industry experts. With this course, we have already helped thousands of professionals in successful career transition. You can check out their testimonials on our Achievers channel, whose link is given in the description below. Without a doubt, this course can set your career to new heights. So visit the course page link given below in the description and take a first step towards career growth in the field of web development.